Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Game Logic from the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube, one of the co-hosts of the Enough to Keep Going weekly video games podcast on the E2KG Network podcasting channel on YouTube. Back with another episode of the Gaming Memo. This is the Gaming Memo for Friday, the 26th of June, 2026. We're a little bit discombobulated tonight. I got Elgato'd right before the live stream because the Wavelink application had been changed and updated, but the old version didn't tell me that there was an update. And the update is not an update, it's a completely new version if you want to integrate it with your Stream Deck Plus, which now only integrates with Wavelink version 3. So I was sitting here wondering why I could not get any audio out of my mic and why I wasn't hearing anything in my headphones. And then fortunately, a few weeks ago, I had updated to the Elgato Wavelink Pro, and that device requires the new software. And I was like, oh, I wonder if, in order to use this, because I've used this with the old version of Wavelink software before, and it has worked. But then I realized, I think they moved everything that's Wavelink over to this new software version. So thanks a lot, everybody, for joining in. I appreciate you. I'm also trying to figure out, I thought I could figure out how to get my chat up on the screen, but that is not the case. Look. Thanks so much, RPG88. Thanks so much for coming through the live stream, by the way, you and Nate. I appreciate you. Tonight's crazy. I don't know how this is going to go or if we're going to get anything done. So much has gone on this week. And I did my best to try and prepare with a little more time compression than I normally have. And I did not give myself enough time to prepare as I started pulling in the news stories, because I knew the news stories I wanted to cover. But then I was like, well, I don't want to just cover the news stories that are the default zeitgeist, so I want to pull in some other stuff as well. And when I started to pull it in, and then I realized all of the things that had actually happened during the week, they are not the three topics that I have in tonight's title. If the music is too loud, by the way, in the chat, please let me know. The audio mix balance and what this new software is doing is kind of throwing me off, so I think it sounds louder in my ear than I was hearing it come out on the YouTube channel when I was checking the health and monitoring laptop. So let me know, like I said, if it's too loud. All right, good. Sounds like you guys can barely hear. The monitor that I got was it was an LG 32-inch that I pulled the trigger on this week. I was looking at a widescreen because the monitor I was replacing was an ultra wide screen. But desk setup and like when I have like all the other audio and streaming equipment and stuff on, I was really feeling comfortable. I have an MSI 32-inch OLED at another workstation, and it works really nice without having like the extra wide body. So I was like, I think I'm going to go with another 32-inch for now. I think I am going to order a third OLED tonight, actually. And then I think if I order it tonight, it'll get here Sunday. That is going to be, I am going to go back to an ultra wide for that, and that's going to replace the one at this workstation, which is also an ultra wide. So, yeah, they are. I bought the first 32-inch, the MSI, like over Christmas, and like it's really great. I had convinced myself it wasn't that big a deal for PC gaming. That first OLED I use at a workstation where I have a gaming PC and the Nintendo Switch 2. And I was like, oh, this is awesome for Nintendo Switch 2. It was cool when I brought PC games up on it, but I was like, the types of PC games that I play, I'm not that wrapped around the axle about them being an OLED. But then like every time I play a game on it, I'm like, oh, the OLED's awesome. And then this week, I finally played, I'll talk about it on your show tomorrow night, I finally played Forza Horizon 6 on PC, because I had been playing entirely on Xbox, and I was like, oh, this would look really great. Like, it looked really good, but I was like, this would look really good on an OLED. And so I finally went ahead and pulled the trigger. And like I said, if I upgrade one more monitor, then I'll be done in the lab for the OLEDs that I need to upgrade. And so I think that's my plan for this weekend. Yeah, the OLED is way better. It's just like the blacks are just so much deeper and richer. The elimination of kind of the side light around like the panel, the colors pop so much. It's just more immersive. Yeah, I just really love it. Uh, there have been obviously display technologies that have come and gone. We went to 4K, and in the PC world, we went to IPS monitors, and then like eventually got to a point where like between VA and IPS, and, it depends on size, and like screen response is sometimes better and stuff. And I mean, IPSs are really nice. So on the other on this side of the lab, I have a 38-inch IPS and a 43-inch VA because they just don't make like IPS panels in that size. With when I go to the 43-inch, but the 38-inch IPS looks gorgeous. But then OLED's another animal. So at any rate, okay, that's probably more tech talk than there should have been. We're gonna go ahead and get started with the news rundown. So this first news story is, again, one of the news stories that I tried to pull in so that I wouldn't kind of be tropish and follow like all the news that everybody else has had to talk about. So this first news story, and I wanted to get some good news in as well. This first news story: Mecha Chameleon sells 7 million copies in the first 2 weeks. The hide and seek game is the latest multiplayer sensation, and I haven't even heard of this game. This news story over on Game Developer by Diego Arguello. Mecha Chameleon, a hide and seek game where players paint their bodies to mimic the stage. Okay, has sold 7 million copies in its first 2 weeks of launch. Developer Lemorian1224 broke the news on Steam this past Sunday. So it sounds like it's a single developer too. It doesn't sound like it's a studio. This past Sunday, with a short and to-the-point message, the game hit the 5 million copies milestone 2 days prior to the latest announcement. Mecha Chameleon, which is currently receiving very positive reviews on Steam with over 13,000 views, has been accruing sales milestones since its launch on June 10th, starting with 500,000 copies after 2 days. The one note of mention that I wanted to put around this news story, and it's kind of funny, the kind of funny Games Daily table talked about this a little on an episode this week. I think it was Greg Miller and Blessing, and they talked about this term friend slop, and and Blessing talked about how it's like it comes across as a derogatory term, but he doesn't really use it as a derogatory term. And I see these. There's a game that has shown, I think at Summer Game Fest, maybe the last 2 years. It's kind of this game that, in my mind, it looks like Teletubbies, but it's about like you're playing. It's multiplayer, and you're these avatar. You're these Teletubby looking avatars. They're not Teletubbies. I don't know what they are. And Teletubbies, they don't look quite like Teletubbies, but that's what I put in my mind. But it's this game. It's just like a activity kind of game. It's like you're in this virtual world, and there's a journey. You're going across the land, and you're doing like activities and tasks along the way. You're not fighting anything. And again, it's this kind of friend slop game. And then you combine that with like the cozy game movement and stuff. And I mean, it's great. If a game like that can sell 7 million copies, I'm fine with that. Now, the edge that this butts up against is this is the type of game that also maybe does well because it's very streamable, right? Is a new term that's come into the fore in the last few years. And the game may not be that great a game in and of itself, but it's streamable. It's a great social game. It's like people like to gather around the campfire, right, and watch the live stream or play these things. And they're playing, they're streaming with fellow collaborators and stuff like that. And my only concern or maybe kind of issue with it is then we get this confusion, right, between these different conversations that happen in the gaming space. And I often talk about this when I talk about people who are fans of platforms versus people who are trying to have a discussion about the business. And the reality that I say is, well, those two people are actually having different conversations, and they actually shouldn't be having them together because they are operating with different, what I call, rules of engagement. Sorry, I'm trying to move my Ultimate 8-bit do here so I can move the MacBook Air over here so I can see the chat. And so these games kind of come up and they will get conflated in this conversation of like what a good game is or what a great game is. And a lot of people will say, this thing is popular on Twitch. It's a good game. And I'm like, no, time out. Like It's not necessarily a good game, and I hate to say it, and I use this term for myself because I used to hang out with, in the live streaming community, and with trying to do that type of content, and I will just be blunt about it. And I will say, look, live streamers play bad video games, like lots of times, like they play video games that would really not be a thing if it weren't for the fact that they were streamable games. So we need to be careful about getting those things conflated and talking about games that are popular because they're high on the Twitch metrics, and the YouTube metrics, and even YouTube metrics, right, are really, when you start parsing and getting down to them, like significantly different than Twitch metrics, I think, because I in my mind, I believe Twitch is bigger around live streaming, whereas YouTube can have greater traction with VODs. So, and now hold on, I'm going to switch to MacBook Air here. Okay, that was one thing I didn't get to do here. I bought another monitor arm to use for my Pony monitor, but I did not have time to rig it, mainly because I would have had to take the back plate off something and put the VESA mount on it. But that's what I'll be doing for monitoring the chat once I get that, get time to make that swap out. So it looks like Hero is in the chat. Hey, what's up, Hero? Thanks so much for swinging through. Okay, that's all I want to cover on that, because we have a lot to go through tonight. And I don't know why YouTube isn't giving me a readout on how long I've been live, because I'm trying to keep track of how much time I am in the show. Let's go ahead and go on to the second news story. Xbox consoles are getting another price increase in August. This news story over on Game Informer by Marcus Stewart. Xbox consoles are getting a third price increase in roughly 13 months, effective August 1st. The costs of certain Xbox models are being raised worldwide by no less than $100. The Xbox Wire Post states that the 512GB models of Xbox will increase in price by $100 and 1TB models by $150 in the US. I saw some people were confused about that. Like, why didn't they say Series S and Series X? And the reason is because there are 1TB models of both the Series S and the X. That's why they termed it this way. The 2TB Xbox Series X model is also being discontinued. Xbox does not list the new prices. Yeah, which I was also a little peeved about, because then that meant I had to go do the math and look up all the prices of all the SKUs, which quite honestly, this generation, I've just got to the point where I don't consciously keep track of what models of Xbox or PlayStation are what prices. I know when the prices increase, but because I'm not personally in the addressable market for buying these consoles, I don't look at what the prices are. But this update would indicate that the affected consoles will soon be sold at the following prices: Xbox Series S 512GB $499.99, Xbox Series S 1TB $599.99. That to me is insane. That an Xbox Series S, a Series S, is $600. And we go back to Gen 8 and how PlayStation was excoriated for having a $600 PlayStation 3 SKU at the top line. Crazy times. Xbox Series X digital 1TB is $750, and the Xbox Series X 1TB is $800. So this is the thing that's kind of crazy to me when we talk about these things comparatively. So I did go off and look at the PlayStation prices. I probably don't have it memorized, but the PlayStation 5 Pro, which has been the much maligned SKU by lots of people who ask, who is this for? Is $900. The Series X 1TB is $800. With the PlayStation 5 Pro, you get a 2TB SSD. A person who has long done drive updates, in all of my Gen 9 consoles, and then until the PlayStation 5 Pro came out, the Gen 9 consoles, I've not touched or opened my PlayStation 5 Pro because 2TB is sufficient. I felt like these consoles should have come out with 2 terabytes at the beginning of the generation. But the 1 terabyte is now $800. So for a big gamer, and I would assume that you are a big gamer if you're going to step to an $800 console, probably needs 2 terabytes of storage. So it's kind of crazy that it's 1 terabyte and it's selling for $800. It's worth noting that Xbox recently revealed a limited 25th anniversary edition of the Series X with 1 terabyte of storage, launching in November. The price of this console has not been revealed, but one would have to imagine, too, it will be priced at an even higher premium. So this is the thing that's crazy, and for this reason, maybe I give a little bit of grace. I kind of, excoriated Xbox for fiscal irresponsibility, for, being at 3% margin and then doing things like holding Xbox Fan Fest and doing an Xbox Fan Fest World Tour and giving away Xboxes, 25th anniversary Xboxes. But I think the reality is when those things hit, they're going to be obviously priced more than the $800. So now you're going to have a 25th anniversary Xbox that's going to skate closer to the PlayStation 5 Pro price. It's crazy. And be weakened on the market in the way that the Series X is. And what I mean by that is you have studios skipping that platform. One would think that with these prices the way they are, developers will be incentivized even more to continue skipping the platform. And it's going to be $800. Which is going to, I guess is going to make the PlayStation 5 and the PlayStation 5 Pro even better market positioned. Here's one of the knock-on effects that to me is kind of insane. All of the rhetoric that I feel like I'm hearing from Satya Nadella and from Asha, since Asha went from being this, Indian goddess that was resurrecting the Xbox brand. I think I would call her Shiva, but I don't know Indian mythology, so I don't know if Shiva is a good god or an evil god. But in my mind, because she's painted in green, now I think that she's, since the day 100 email, in my mind, I equate her to being Hela from God of War Ragnarok. And like when I see her in my mind, she's got the Hela suit on. And she's turned evil, right? Now that she's making all these moves, which I think the whole thing, in my personal mind, I think I've conveyed, I think the whole thing was orchestrated for her to arrive on the scene and for the PR handlers to make her appear in a very positive light so that she would have political padding, right, when she had to do this heel turn at day 100. But everything that I've been hearing from her and from Satya leads me to believe, and I'll go back a little bit. So Xbox has been getting content on its platform. You could say she's brought Kali Yuga to Xbox. Yeah, I need... Look, before God of War Laufey comes out, I need to become... And I've wanted to do this for a very long time. Like, there was a very brief moment back when I was a kid when Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom came out, and I did a very brief foray into understanding Indian mythology, but I haven't got back to it, and I need to. But yeah, Ramon says you could say she's brought Kali Yuga to Xbox. Thanks a lot, Ramon, for stopping by. I appreciate you. But all the indications are certain content has gotten on the Xbox platform. Atlas, Sega, not Sega, but Atlas games finally coming, JRPGs finally coming. Those have gotten on the Xbox because Xbox has gone, probably flown Sarah Bond because she's always had a good working relationship with the Japanese studios. Put Sarah Bond on a plane, went out there and made deals, provided incentives, financial incentives for those studios to go ahead and bring their games to Xbox. Every indication that I see tells me that is not going to continue. So my anticipation is that a lot of the studios that we've seen, in particular APAC studios that we've seen return to Xbox, are going to go right back to skipping the platform. And now this thing, right, the main core SKU is at $800. And on top of that, you're going to put exclusives on that box, and it's not going to be selling. So the whole convergence of the timeline about what's going on there is just sort of crazy. And so it causes me to ask the question, obviously people have been asking it, should Xbox bother to continue to be in hardware? Because one question I would say is, look, if you're at the point where you have to do things like this, and you know that this is going to cause your sales to go to almost zero, why would you bother to continue? Like, why are you bothering to continue to fund having these things built? Why are you continuing to put purchase orders in? Like, are GameStop and Best Buy, right, putting in orders for pallets of these things to be delivered? I mean, every indication, and who I've talked to, where I've talked to people in the supply chain and in store, tells me that that's not happening. They're not ordering these things. So, like, first of all, who are you making these things for? And who and what retail chain is buying them at these prices? It's just very strange to me. Den Solo Fly, thanks a lot, Den Solo, for swinging through. I appreciate you. Mentions the exclusive games, it's just a bait to make the hardcore around until the next step. Yeah, and I don't disagree. I mean, I said as much, when they did this, like, it's just to quiet the rioters while this is going on, so that whatever masterful orchestration is being executed, that there's not a loud shouting of discontent while it's going on in the background. And I would say the same thing for this. I'm saying the same thing when I talk about these 25th anniversary edition Xboxes. When these things come out, they are going to be astronomically priced and out of the reach of so many consumers, but especially they're going to be out of the reach of diehard Xbox fans. And the diehard Xbox fans would have shouted and screamed if food, if food for starving men was put out of their reach in a place where they couldn't get to it. And so a way to ameliorate that crowd, that negative sentiment, was to get those Xboxes in the hands of some of the diehard fans who will be online participating in the social media game called Twitter and extolling the virtues of Xbox, continuing. So again, I go back to, but what is really the point? Ramon Terrell says, I've been trying to wrap my mind around what they believe they can do, turning it around. Yeah, I have no idea. I don't believe, and I think I said last episode or maybe a couple years, there is no turnaround in my mind. And yea, verily, this is the point where I would, right, break camp and make the official turn to being a publisher. In my mind, again, their best bet, particularly with the size of studios that they have and the money that they are spending to run the business. Because again, we go back to the 3% profit margin, right? And I talk about how that's making 3 cents on every dollar. I mean, what that means is that for every penny that you're spending to run the business and sell your goods, you are putting 3 cents in your pocket for every dollar that you're spending to run the business. And like at a certain point, that doesn't make much sense. And look, one of the other things that I'll say, when we get later in the conversation, we talk about what's going on with prices and some of the unwillingness to pay those prices. We also have to look, PlayStation is arguably the most successful gaming business in the combined console and PC gaming space. They make the majority of their revenue. They make 1/3 of the revenue that the combined console and PC gaming space is pulling in. They're at an 11-12% profit margin. So yeah, they're doing good, but there's not a lot of room, right, for them to give up the ghost. That 11-12%, that is you can call it the sweet spot, but in my mind, it's also kind of the bare minimum. When you get less than that, you start looking at being unhealthy. And so, like I said, we'll have that talk of what these prices mean. One of the things that I think that this indicates, and that I've been saying very loudly, is, look, before he became an Xbox employee, a Microsoft employee, I used to shout the virtues of Matthew Ball. I really liked the reports that he's put out the last 2 years. And I now talk about the liar's boot camp that an Xbox executive goes through. Maybe a Microsoft executive, but definitely an Xbox executive. And Matthew Ball went through that boot camp in 24 hours because he began lying the next day. His statement that we can't make these things fast enough to meet demand, when he talked about hardware, this being at a point where we're learning that Xbox is at 3% profit margin, that they're virtually selling no hardware, that their hardware business, we've known for a very long time that their hardware business is the Achilles heel. It's absolutely absurd for him in a public interview to make the statement, we can't make these things fast enough to meet demand. Now, there's a bit of truth to that. Because these things are so expensive for you to make, and because you're being charged so much money to consume capacity in a manufacturing run, because Foxconn and whoever, right, the manufacturing is contracted out to would much rather produce PlayStations or Nintendo Switches than allocate that time and capacity on a manufacturing line to producing Xboxes, which for them is not a profitable business. That is the reason you can't meet demand. It's not because people are like jumping out windows to buy Xboxes. It's because nobody wants to make them. And so it was, as normal, a very carefully crafted PR, Xbox executive talking out of both sides of their mouth, with the end result being saying something that's not true. Because if you couldn't make these things fast enough, then you wouldn't be needing to raise prices this way. On top of that, Asha Sharma's comments right before, which was that gaming was becoming too expensive for people. Well, what are you going to do about that, Asha? Well, I'm going to raise the price on the Xbox by $150. Like it is something straight out of a slapstick sitcom. It is remarkably unbelievable that we often talk about the way that the Xbox executives talk too much, but this is a classic example of how they say some things which are just not true, some things that they assert is an industry problem, and then they turn right around and do the very thing that they're accusing the industry of being guilty of. And we knew damn well that when they said it, they knew that this was the plan, right? The things happen in such proximity. These things don't happen overnight. They're scripted out ahead of time. And then you go out and you say something wildly disingenuous in this manner and then turn around and do these things. So it's crazy to me. The ongoing argument that I've seen on top of this is that two arguments that I don't agree with. One from an Xbox content creator who says you should just get on a payment plan. And another from an Xbox content creator who says, arguing with that person, but who says we should delay the next generation consoles. Nobody wants to pay for that. These things are out of the reach of a lot of people. There's still a lot of juice left. I have some comments on that, which we're going to get to when we talk about the greater overall discussion of gaming affordability. But one thought I'll leave you with at this point is, I'll ask, does it make sense to stay on current generation hardware, which is now 6 years old, is, in the case of the Xbox, isn't quite honestly keeping up with the performance capabilities of the PlayStation? Has content skipping the Xbox and is using these spec'd components that are part of the thing that's driving your costs up. And so the recommendation is delay the console, which means allow the status quo, which is the problem. The status quo is the problem. The fact that the consoles are high in price and are going up in price, and the fact that for the Xbox, content is skipping the platform, and the fact that nobody's buying the consoles, all of those things are part of the status quo that will not change as long as those conditions remain. And so then you ask yourself, is the right strategy to allow that status quo to remain? Well, if the status quo remains, then that means that all the conditions that are driven by them remains, which is that no one's buying the console, content continues to skip the platform, and your consumers are relatively considered second, are going to be looked at as second and third class citizens on the market. On top of that, you're putting stuff into Game Pass, and you're pulling marquee content like Call of Duty out of it, and nobody's really clear what you're going to do about Game Pass, because Satya has asserted that he's been subsidizing the business for 25 years. And in my mind, that means that he's been subsidizing Game Pass. And so is Game Pass going to continue along in the same structure that it has? Here's my thing. If content skipping the platform and the cost of the platform is high, and nobody new is onboarding, and your Game Pass subscriptions are therefore going to start stagnating, and you're still putting stuff in Game Pass, then Game Pass is just going to become more and more and more of a problem. And if you alter it, if you change it, and you've already taken day and date and paywalled it at the ultimate tier, and your compensating thing was, well, you know, you guys now have access to cloud, which is not an answer that everybody wants. If you turn that screw one more time and disenfranchise Game Pass, then you're at a point where, like, why be on the platform at all? So we'll come back to that later in the show. Let me check some of the comments in chat. Dentalfly says, I underestimated Aaron Greenberg. He looks goofy and silly, but in fact, I think he's the mastermind for this parasocial manipulation. Ramon says, my favorite is Satya talking about hardware prices rising as if he's not one of the tech supervillains behind it. Once again, he insults our intelligence. Yeah, true, very true, Ramon. Okay, all right, let's talk about PlayStation Store. So PlayStation Store deleting 551 digital purchases, offers no refunds. This news story over on Game Rant by Michael Brandon Ingram. More than 551 digital movies are being removed from the PlayStation Store in September 2026, and it seems there are no refunds available for the affected titles. The delistings from the PlayStation Store include a large number of fan-favorite movies, ranging from Terminator to Bridget Jones's Diary. While the Sony Marketplace is most known for its library of games spanning PlayStation's entire history, the Marketplace once offered a robust selection of movies. During the PS3 and PS4 eras, users could buy films and TV shows directly from the PlayStation Store to watch on their Sony consoles, including both new releases and beloved classics. Sony officially discontinued its sale of movies through the PlayStation Store in 2021. The fans can still access and watch their purchased movies on PlayStation devices. However, Sony has now confirmed that a large selection of movies will soon be removed from the PlayStation Store. And so this goes to licensing. I think these are Studio Canal movies. And the big thing here is obviously they're offering no refunds for them. Now, what I haven't pulled the thread is, so number one, Xbox did this also. I think they pulled all their movies and video content from the Xbox. I'm not absolutely certain. And I know at one point they had also done something before. And I know, like, my content that was on Xbox, like, I couldn't access it via Xbox, but I could access it on Windows, which was a thing that a lot of people didn't know, via my Microsoft account. So I still had that stuff there, and I think I still do. What I don't know is then when Xbox did a second round of this and they, like, really killed all that content, there was a way you could get reciprocation through, like, I forget, like movies.com, whatever it was. There was some service that came into being a few years ago that their deal was they were supposed to be like this bridge or unification service, or like if you, like, and they covered, I can't remember what it was, but I think they covered like Disney Plus they covered Disney and iTunes, something or other, but basically it was if you told them or presented credentials or whatever and told them, hey, I own this content on this streaming service, and they were, like I said, they were a unification between like multiple streaming services, they would say, hey, okay, well, you have a token within our streaming service to access that content. So I haven't pulled the thread if that same type of thing here is available for PlayStation. I'll say if you invested a ton, and I was bitten by this also because PlayStation also had some goofy, like, maximum number of devices thing that once you hit that cap, at least I could never figure out how to delete a device from that list. So I just hit a point where, because I go through tech devices very quickly, I hit a point where I just couldn't get my PlayStation video content on any of my mobile devices, and I just stopped buying through that store before they even stopped selling stuff on the store. So yeah, this is a problem, and I don't know that there's any recourse from it. If you bought movies, I mean, and look, and my feeling is like when these things happen, each of us as consumers, we're going to talk a lot tonight about consumer responsibility and making choices about the things that you do rather than just voicing that you're angry about things that are happening. People have to make the decision. If this is a thing where you invested a ton of money, then your decision should be about going scorched earth, right? and that means no longer supporting the platform and getting off of the platform and taking your business elsewhere. One of the things where I am losing tolerance and patience for is, and lots of my PlayStation friends are in the chat tonight, I'm going to talk about PlayStation people, is when you say that you're holding a company accountable, but you're not actually doing anything to hold the company accountable. Because voicing anger online, to me, doesn't do anything. And here's my point. And again, this is going to be a little awkward. We have to have tense conversations. Like, we have to have uncomfortable, we say this at work all the time, right? You have to have uncomfortable conversations to get to resolutions, right? Nobody moves forward in not talking about difficult topics. And so this is one of those things. If you're saying you don't like PlayStation's live service strategy, and it was a waste and it's mismanagement, we're going to talk about Bungie a little bit later, and you're angry at PlayStation for putting a lot of effort into live service games, and you say that yelling and screaming at them is holding them accountable, that's not holding them accountable. Particularly if you've continued to subscribe and pay for PlayStation Plus. You have enabled the behavior that is sending telemetry to them that tells them they need to continue investing in live service. And we're going to talk about their continuing intention to invest in live service tonight as well. So again, that's not accusing you of like not being dissatisfied. That's just acknowledging and surfacing the fact that while you may be dissatisfied, you are potentially doing tangible things that incentivize them to believe a certain thing, which I think is actually true, but your own behavior is part of that enablement, right? Again, yelling and screaming at people on social media and online, I don't think is an effective tactic for informing a corporation of something that you want or something that you don't want. Taking objective and evidentiary action by withholding money is the way that you actually get them to change. And then again, you have to acknowledge whether or not, you have to acknowledge one of two things. You have to say either, look, I don't think that me unsubscribing from PlayStation Plus is going to really do anything to move the needle for them. I'm also not out here telling people to sign petitions and boycott a thing. So, I don't think that's going to work. And we've seen boycotts and petitions. They don't really do anything online. But you can say, look, I understand that I'm not going to move that rock, but I am still going to make a moral decision, a value decision, that I'm not going to support the thing that they're doing. But I am going to start pointing out, right, when we say we don't support something, we don't like something, but yet we're actually tangibly and objectively supporting it. Like, that has to become a thing that we need to talk through, or else we're going to continue to enable the industry to get where it is now. And that's the whole topic of tonight. How do we get to higher prices? Why are higher prices going on? And what are people going to do about it? Hero Down says, I'm a consumer. Game Logic. Hero Down I'm not an activist. And look, Hero, that's exactly the thing that I agree with. Look, I'm not an activist. Look, prices are going up and people are saying certain things, but here's where we are. I'm a capitalist. I'm not a socialist. I'm not a communist. I'm not a Marxist. And I'm not using those terms as insulting or derogatory terms. I'm saying that those philosophies, those ideologies support a certain notion of how economies work. That is not where we live. And so having an expectation that our economy is going to work like that is just sticking your head in the sand and screaming and yelling at the moon. It does not do anything. And so I kind of question the usefulness and the worthiness of it. So Denzafly says, Logic, please listen to my perspective. We, the old generation, had our times with our gaming preferences. Sony now pandering for a new generation of gamers, not us. Let the new generation have it. Yeah, and I mean, and Den's if you're ever yes, a lot of this is generational, and that's should definitely be part of the discussion tonight too. Sorry, I'm having a really bad allergy night. And so for the market and the industry, here's my capitalist perspective. And we've had a lot of, we'll talk about this tonight too. We've had a lot of, the younger generation only wants to play on phones and tablets. They don't care about platforms, which I think is complete bullshit. I also think, Denzafly also says, not Denzafly, I'm sorry, Denzafly, I don't know why your name popped in my head, but Jason Ronald, when he said this thing at the GDC Project Helix presentation where he said, well, people don't really think of themselves as mobile gamers or console gamers or PC gamers. And I'm like, Jason, you're full of shit. And two, again, you're like, as Ramon, you're speaking to us like we're idiots, absolute idiots. Absolutely, people think of themselves as a console player or a PC gamer or a mobile gamer. Like, it's ludicrous for you to say something like that. It's just so intellectually dishonest. So here's where I am on my capitalist view of the industry. Yeah, the industry has to play a very careful game because there's a slant and a desire to want, and it's not just gaming, it's all of tech. There's a slant and a desire to cater to younger generations. But one of the things I pointed out in this research that I wrote up in April about, what do I call it? How America's middle class built the gaming industry and why it's fracturing now. And I talked about the wealth disparity and the wealth distribution in at least the United States. And the United States is a big power of the gaming industry. The wealth distribution is crazy. Like, great. Younger generations, sure. But those younger generations are far more saddled with education debt than the older generations are. They have far less of the total wealth. They're in possession of a much smaller fraction of the total wealth available in the country. They will probably, they're not being set up to ever have the hope to be able to buy a house before age 30. So they have not come of age yet, right, in terms of having large swaths of discretionary income to spend on gaming. The older generations do. So the question becomes are you going to make content for the people who are going to buy it and therefore power your industry? Or are you going to make content for people who aren't going to buy it? And so there has to be this graduated evolutionary, right? I can't remember what to call it, but it's not a linear relationship in how they need to craft their strategy around how they are making content to cater to certain people versus cater to others, because you could spend a lot of money and a lot of time catering to a younger generation who can't afford to buy anything in the hopes that they are going to be able, and what happens, and a large part of this article is about the split between the middle class and the upper income. That gap is widening in those younger generations. Now they have a point where their crust of upper income, many of them, they have a higher percentage of people hitting those upper income bandwidths earlier at a younger age than we did. So again, that is a thing where the demographics of the market are going to seesaw, and it's something that these gaming companies have to consider. But this whole notion that, younger generations only want to play on phones and tablets, I'm like, that's great. They don't have any money. I refer to them as broke-ass college kids, right? Which is what we all went through. Great. They only want to play on phones and tablets. They don't have any money to distribute. So what are you going to, you're just going to put content there for free? And part of the thing that I'm trying to get across to people who have had the opinion that, companies should be eating costs and all this kind of stuff. I go back to all of us who are participating consumers in this market, we all also work. And I know where I work, I want a raise every year. And so I am not in the business of recommending to my company that they give things away for free. And I don't think anyone who has a job is, because if your company gives stuff away for free, they're giving stuff away that you are spending labor hours working. So please explain to me how you're going to get a raise and you're going to be able to feed your kids and you're going to be able to send your kids to college when your company is taking your work and your labor hours on a daily basis and giving that money away for free. There's only one reason to do that, and that's if you are trying to make a big market share grab. And you're trying to say, hey, here's this great thing. It's really cheap, inexpensive, or free. and then get everybody hooked on it, right? This is the drug dealer economy. And then once they are fans of it, start raising the prices and getting them to pay for it. This is also the incentivification strategy, the choke point capitalism strategy, right? Let me play the good guy and be the intermediary and get the goods that these suppliers are supplying to an addressable market for less price, not cost, less price, because the suppliers are still spending the same cost to make the stuff at a lesser price for consumers. Then I become the good guy because I brought the consumers all this stuff at a lower price. And so publicly facing, I'm the good guy. But on the back end, what I'm telling the suppliers is that they have to keep their prices low. Because the consumers don't want to raise their prices. But then I tell the consumers that, hey, I've got to raise prices because the supply is becoming more expensive. Where does the money go? The money goes to the intermediary. It doesn't go back to those suppliers. It goes to the intermediary, at least in the largest percentage. And so who makes out? The intermediary. Money is slowly drained from the consumer side of the equation and the supplier side of the equation and goes to this intermediary. Because without the intermediary, the money would simply be distributed between the consumers and the suppliers. But the intermediary's case is that they have reach. They can provide access. And so the suppliers are convinced that that is a thing that they should give up profits for. And so at the end of the day, the intermediaries, who are the trillion-dollar companies, look at the trillion-dollar companies. They're all intermediaries, right? They're all people who provide suppliers reach. But they are participating in incentivification and draining from both sides of the equation and reshuffling, refunneling those funds towards themselves. Now I don't even know where I am now. So Denzel says, I know we have the money, but we became a minority in the gaming industry. They didn't neglect us completely. Yeah, I mean, it depends on what research you look at. Yes, they do, and this is one of the problems I've had with the data and the analytics that go around. You can see higher percentages of younger generations actually onboarding to consoles and PC. But the problem I have with all of these analytics and all of these data, a lot of which I believe in, they don't effectively instrument and make transparent to us where the spend is. And one of the things I've been saying is it's quite clear to me by patterns that I'm seeing that many times engagement does not equate to spend. And so there's an emphasis that these data analytics companies are putting on getting products to people. But I'm like, if those people aren't spending money, again, it's like one of the patterns of behavior is like the MAU number split between PlayStation and Xbox. Xbox asserts 500 million MAU. And actually, I think there's more than that. PlayStation asserts 135 million MAU. 130, 135, right? All depending on what quarter you're looking at the data, 125. Well, what does that mean by revenue? PlayStation makes more revenue and has fewer users, which means the average spend per user is 5 times what it is on Xbox. Xbox has a huge number of users who are not spending money. So their ARPU is very, very small, $47. On PlayStation, ARPU is $250. And so this goes to like, what kind of business do you want to run? Do you want to, and there are businesses that have those specific strategies. Do we want to cater to a larger market of lesser valued customers or consumers, right? Which puts you in the mode of trading like a commodity, which is kind of what Xbox is when you look at a 3% profit margin. You're almost functioning like a non-profit. And one of the things I always say is gaming is not a charity. So, okay, like we dumpster dived on that quite a lot. But look, my point is on this PlayStation thing, if this is a deal breaker for you, you should be going scorched earth. You should be deciding this doesn't work for me. I'm not going to invest. I'm not going to support this company, and you should take your business elsewhere. Like yelling and screaming about it online that they pulled these movies away from you and you're really pissed off, that doesn't do anything. Particularly if you're like the people online. But because largely if you were the people online, Most of us are like that 4% that Matt Piscatella talks about who buys a game, like more than one game a month, or maybe into the 12% who buy, like, so you're continuing to pay into the system, but you're expressing discontent. Like you need to weaponize your money and do something about it. All right, Ramon. Ramon says he's got to head off on DPS. Okay, thanks a lot, Ramon. I appreciate you coming through. Tell the DPS guys I said hello, and hopefully I'll be able to jump on a podcast with them pretty soon. Yeah, Hero says my 13-year-old has multiple gaming accounts, but I buy all the games and only games I choose. He doesn't have the money. Right? Yeah, my kids are the same. Yeah, sure, they have accounts, but they have to get my permission to spend, and it's all my money. So, okay. So we talked about PlayStation. All right, PlayStation hardware. This news story over on GameIndustry.biz. PlayStation hardware sales fall to their lowest May total since 2000 U.S. monthly charts. Price rises hit Sony's console sales, but 007 First Light and Switch 2 helped U.S. gaming spending grow 3%. Okay, we're going to try and pick up the pace a little because I think we've been at this an hour already. PlayStation 5 unit sales in the United States dropped 58% year on year in May, according to Circana, reaching their lowest May total since 2000. Xbox unit sales, meanwhile, reached their lowest ever recorded figures for May, dropping 12% year on year. The PS5 saw a price increase in April, blah, 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 blah. I mean, so, like, we know the tale of this tape, right? I mean, hardware sales are down across the board, more so on Xbox than they are for PlayStation, but they are problems for everyone. The lay of the land is PlayStation has a booster shot coming up with GTA 5. They also have Wolverine in the barrel. I know there were sales on PlayStation 5 right now. And I mean, this is my thing too about these Xbox prices that just went up. Xbox prices are going to go up on the 1st of August. The chilling effect that created is that sent a shock through the system of the gaming market, causing everyone to now have fear that PlayStation will do the same thing. But do you think the result is that people are now going out and panic buying Xboxes, or that people are going out and panic buying PlayStation 5s? People are going out and panic buying PlayStation 5s and PS5 Pros in anticipation of the launch of GTA 6. And the marketing deal with Rockstar for GTA 6 is with PlayStation, who is super heavily marketing GTA 6. So it'll be interesting to see these numbers in 2 months. My prediction and belief is, like I said, everybody's who is going to buy a console is rushing out to buy PlayStations now for fear that PlayStation is going to do the same thing. Not in an effort to beat the time or beat the clock before Xbox prices go up and buy an Xbox. But I could be wrong. So it'll be interesting to come back and revisit them. Game sales, number 1, 007 First Light, so that's good and great to see. Forza Horizon 6 coming in at number 2. Lego Batman Subnautica, surprisingly, popping up to number 4, so hopefully that will bode well for the legal case brewing between, I always forget who that, is it Crafton and the developer? I can't remember. MLB The Show coming in at number 6. Crimson Desert in at number 7. Yoshi and the Mysterious Book, a Nintendo exclusive, coming in at number 8. Super surprising because I like Yoshi games, but I did not think, I know Yoshi in the Crafted World did well. I did not think Yoshi and the Mysterious Book was going to pop NPD, but there it is. Call of Duty Black Ops 7 finally kind of picking up and selling with none of its competition really in sight. Battlefield not up here. And then Mario Kart World coming in at number 10, which is also surprising because I thought that had kind of exhausted its big purchase window. Hero Down Under says Saros didn't pop on MPD. Cross-gen is here forever, though. Yeah, and I mean, I've talked about that a little. I mean, I think next generation console gamers are going to be exposed to a much more aggressive cross-gen kind of state of being than they were this generation even. And it's going to become much more PC-like. Cross-gen is a fact of life in PC land. It has been for a while, and it works. We're going to talk about that a little bit tonight too. If I can get through these news stories in less than 2 hours. So this news story also on gamingindustry.biz. Sony cuts 292 jobs at Destiny maker Bungie. Redundancies are impacting most of the Destiny team as well as some of the Marathon team members. Sony Interactive Entertainment is cutting jobs at Destiny maker Bungie in an internal email published to the PlayStation firm's website. Studio Business Group CEO Herman Hulst said that a significant number of staff are affected by this news, including most of the Destiny team as well as some Marathon team members. To be specific, 292 staff are being let go, according to a WARN filing with Washington State's Employment Security Department. In addition to Bungie staff being let go, Hulst said that some Sony Interactive Entertainment staff who supported the studio have been made redundant. And there's the PR speak. So where does that leave Bungie? Is really the question. This is a significant number of the Destiny 2 team, though not all. And an impact on the Marathon team, which my gut is telling me is around inefficiencies, maybe around low performers. This Destiny 2 peelback is obviously oriented around Destiny going into a maintenance state and not really going into a new content state. The question is what goes from here. And, Hulst has mentioned, together with Bungie leadership, we reviewed the studio's long-term direction, development priorities, resource needs, and role within our broader portfolio strategy, multiple alternatives. And so he's mentioned, I think somewhere else, that Bungie is still pitching stuff. And so the good news is that they have not been blue pointed, right? Blue Point had a statute of limitations on how long they had an opportunity to pitch stuff before, PlayStation said, okay, you guys have had your shot. Nothing's really, cracking an egg here. So we're going to shut it down. That's not what's happened yet to Bungie's. And so that may mean that the evaluation is that there's some legs in Marathon, but maybe that there's some hope that they pitch something. One of the things that I'm considering, I go back with Bungie, before even the Microsoft acquisition, to the point where, they were doing, things like Myth and Myth 2, which was a fantasy RTS, with elevation change, right, impact on the battlefield, which was back then something nobody else was doing. Quite honestly, I am curious if, we see, and I'm not saying this is likely to happen or what I expect to happen. It's not what I predict to happen. I'm saying as a Bungie fan of the studio who goes back 20 years, I'm excited by the notion that, I'm not excited by the notion that they could get shut down. I'm excited by the other side of that coin, which is that, we could see, shade of a hair of a chance, we could see Bungie return to doing a single player, right, narrative game, or a game not in the shooter genre. There are those possibilities. So it'll be interesting to see, where they wind up. Hopefully they continue to hang in there. Josh Ayers comes through. Thanks a lot, Josh Ayers, for swinging through. Dry Chisel, thanks so much for coming through as well. Yeah, that would be awesome, right, to see Bungie return to its single-player roots. Or even if you got to do something multiplayer, I don't know that it would play very well. But, quite frankly, nobody's really done a multiplayer RTS in a way that has been commercially significant in my mind, other than maybe the Total War guys. I think we're seeing Age of Empires rolling up shop here with what's about to happen at Xbox. That studio's name has been in the wind. And then there's StarCraft, which is still in the scene, but StarCraft hasn't really been refreshed in, a very, very, very long time. So, other than Total War, maybe a little bit of Dawn of War, I don't think we've really seen, anything particularly exciting in that space. So it'd be interesting. No, I shouldn't say we haven't seen anything exciting. I don't think we've seen anything that has radically rippled the commercial landscape. And so it'd be interesting to see if, it would be amazing if Bungie went back to its RTS roots, and did something in that space. A little more Circana data. Josh Ayers says co-op first-person shooter, not a live service. Yeah, that would be awesome. Like, wouldn't a Bungie game that was a shooter but was like It Takes Two, right? Like the Hazelight Studio style games. That could be exciting if somebody went in that direction. Hero says, I hope Bungie does a single player with multiplayer component. Yep. Mandated co-op shooter sounds great. Some more Circana data. Circana, the story over on GameIndustry.biz by Alex Forbes Calvin. Nintendo Switch 2 helped U.S. physical game spending increase year on year for first time since 2009. So again, it's not all doom and gloom. There are positive signs of light. All depends on which media outlet is reporting it. The Nintendo Switch 2 helped U.S. physical games spending see its first year-on-year increase since 2009. That's according to a post from Market Tracker Circana's senior director, Matt Piscatella, on Blue Sky, which showed that spending rose by 3% year-on-year for the 12 months ending May 2026, rising to $1.6 billion. The last time there was an increase in physical spending was 2009, when this part of the market was worth $11.5 billion. Piscatella said that the broad decline in physical sales is due to the overwhelming majority of sales being digital, while secondhand doesn't really matter. Speaking of gaming industry updates, Piscatella said that there was one very simple reason for this year-on-year sales increase. This is the Switch 2 bump. Physical software sales on Nintendo platforms are up around 26% compared to a year ago, but still down from the year-ending May 2024 period. And yeah, so, the Switch platform has historically moved more units of physical stuff. I know on the original Switch, I would buy my games physical. Again, being a digital warrior, I would buy my games physical because I was always concerned about storage space on the Switch. So I was like, if I could buy my games physical and not worry about managing my physical storage on the Switch, because if you remember when the original Switch launched, it was very anemic on storage capacity. So I was like, yeah, I'm buying all these things digital. I'm not racking up a bunch of digital downloads. I'm buying all these things physical. I'm not racking up a bunch of digital downloads. So good news there. So let's start getting into some of the controversial stuff. And I think we've got some swingbacks on some of the other news stories as I get into this. Yeah, we'll come back to the PlayStation Live service story a bit. This news story over on GameIndustry.biz again. Micron says chip shortage will improve gradually in 2028. This is another one by Alex Forbes Calvin. The CEO of chip giant Micron, Sanjay Mehrotra, has said that the AI-fueled global RAM and NAND shortage will continue through 2027 and improve gradually the following year. Speaking to investors in the company's Q3 earnings call for its 2026 financial year, the chief executive went on to admit that while the situation is going to improve in 2028, the firm still has no visibility on when memory supply will be able to catch up with increasing demand. So this news story didn't actually really get into the thing. What I really wanted to talk about was this 5-year deal that Micron signed with, I forget what the term is. I think the term is strategic, I don't know, something. It obviously means strategic partners of theirs, right? And so 10 vendors went to Micron to secure these 5-year deals. And they are, and just to provide clarity, I think there was some belief by some people that these were all corporate consumers. They're not, like, in the RAM industry, when they talk about enterprise, that includes OEMs that are coming them to source RAM for products that for them are consumer products, right? But you're selling to another business entity, so it is still looked at as an enterprise deal. So I think I don't know. I think these 10 people who came to them are largely your consumer electronics people. So Apple was definitely one of them. I think it also included Dell, who covers down on both enterprise and consumer. I suspect maybe HP was one. But I think these were all consumer electronics companies who were coming to them to try and secure a deal for RAM so that all of the RAM would not just go to enterprise. Now, there's a couple things that need to be layered into the story, because most of what went around today was vilification of Micron, and I'm not saying that they aren't worthy of some vilification, but was vilification of Micron at making some money-hatting deal to sell RAM at high prices to consumer electronics companies. And we need to broaden out the story and put some of the more information around it, because it's not just Micron. So one of the things that was mentioned in this earnings call was about how during years prior to this, there were certain vendors, and the common belief is that who they were talking about was Apple. There were certain vendors that basically squeezed them so dry and squeezed them so tight that they, one, had problems maintaining profitability. But here's the big thing in terms of impact, that they were not able to make commitments to capital and investments that they had on the books and had planned, had those B2B customers not been so, and I'll just use the directly slanderous term, so stingy. Yeah, the real Nate. Yeah, it's not just them; it's the whole RAM cartel. So that's a good point, Nate. Let's go back and talk about the RAM industry that I've been writing about since the beginning of the year, but nobody reads what I write, so people don't know this information. There are only 3 big RAM vendors. There's SK Hynix, there's Samsung, and there's Micron. Those 3 vendors provide 99% of the RAM, right, to all of the businesses. Which means when one of them is impacted, like when you have something like a tsunami in Japan that causes a nuclear energy plant meltdown, that's a big impact. One of the other things that was confused was the earlier story this year that Micron is pulling out of consumer. Micron did not pull out of consumer, as you see by evidence of this deal. What Micron did is they pulled their subsidiary out of being a going concern, which was crucial. Micron fabricates the ODM RAM. They then ran their own consumer vendor and, smoked some of their own supply, so to speak, and sold it commercially as crucial. And that is what they pulled off the market. They're still supplying RAM to consumer electronics vendors, as evidenced by this deal, as I mentioned. So now, in making this deal, there's certain dynamics that are at play. Really, it says shout out to China ramping up to get into the RAM market and already hitting some consumers via Corsair. Right. Yeah. I mean, and Samsung and SK. And Samsung has laid on additional capacity, which will hopefully help with this. But back to Micron specifically, one of the things that we need to keep in mind, I'm not saying you need to remember, I'm not saying you need to take it into account, but you need to be aware of it. Corporations have very, very, very long memories. And corporate memory becomes something, we use this term, it becomes institutionalized. And so it starts characterizing the culture of the company and starts informing the way that they make decisions. And let's go back and follow the money and see how this all comes full circle. Because it starts with Apple. It's funny, this week I've seen a lot of the clip from, I can't remember the name of the movie, I've seen frequently the clip of the Apple TV movie with where Michael Fassbender is playing Steve Jobs and Seth Rogen is playing Wozniak, and it's the whole argument in the auditorium between the two of them, where the assistant keeps calling for everybody to leave, and Steve Jobs says no, because he wants everybody to see this confrontation between he and Woz. And one of the things Steve Jobs says is look, while I wasn't here, you guys convinced yourselves that the Apple Newton was a good thing. And so you invested in it and went big on it. And they put money elsewhere too. But his point was, you guys were 90 days from insolvency. You were 90 days from being uncertain if you were going to be able to make payroll. And I've been mentioning to people, I've said to people for 10 years, maybe 20, executives who are at Apple now were there and they remember that. And that's why Apple, number one, hoards cash. They have an incredible amount of cash on hand for a tech company, and investors are constantly on them. You should use that to go make acquisitions. There's a saying that happens at Apple now at the Cupertino campus, and that's never again. Never again. It's ingrained in their corporate culture. Never again will they be 90 days from insolvency. And so they don't like, and like this is one of the things right at PlayStation too, right? We keep going on this thing about like PlayStation should stop doing live service. There's a little bit of that, of an analogous culture at PlayStation where like they don't want to leave themselves vulnerable to what everyone else does, right? They want to have the ability to control their fate in bad times. So let's go back to Apple. So a lot of this starts with the fact that Apple has a never again mentality that causes them to hoard cash. That also, under the regime of Tim Cook, has caused them to squeeze suppliers in a very, like, just Machiavellian way. Like, in a way that, like, you know, we have this thing of going around about Valve that, you know, Valve says, like, the memory guys are telling them, hey, if you even question the deal, right? If you even try to negotiate, they just hang up the phone and they stop talking. You know, they never talk to them again. And there's a lot of that at Apple, and we've seen this with display suppliers who fail to meet like Apple quality standards and things like that. Like Apple will just tell you, look, you can either get a deal from us, which is gonna, like, we're gonna build billions of iPhones, right? So you can either take the deal with us, or you can just not be an Apple supplier. You can just not be an Apple vendor. We don't have any problems with that. We'll go give our business to someone else. And a lot of these companies are taking these deals to stay in business, right? Because they know that taking that Apple deal, becoming an iPhone vendor is a thing, right? We're going on iPhone 18. We're going on 20 years of iPhone. And so some of these people are becoming suppliers because, like, this is the next 20 years of my company. So what happens with the Micron dynamic is Micron, who is now making money hand over fist because they have now come into possession of one of the most desired supplies on the planet. And they are now in a position to dictate terms. So imagine if you were a vendor who had been eating Apple's boot. And I don't think Apple was the only one doing this. Like they said, because they said some vendors. I don't think Apple was the only one doing this. I think, quite honestly, I think if they were dealing with PlayStation, I think Sony was one of them. Who were like, look, we're the biggest console vendor on the market. You can either take our deal or we can go find another supplier. So for years, for a decade or so, you've been under the heel of these consumer electronic companies. Now you have the upper hand. Now you have the negotiating power. You know, and again, this is the thing, like if you've ever taken a course and had to deal with contract negotiations, which is a thing, you know, that I've done, and I think some other people in the chat have as well, like there's lots of very hyper-specific tactics that you're taught, right, in negotiation training. And so now you're in a state where you have the upper hand, and you're going to make this deal. You are going to take measures to ensure that you are not going to be kicked under the table in making this deal. You are going to make sure that this deal is one that allows you to be profitable for the entirety of the 5-year period. You are not going to take a deal where you are placed at risk of going under. But more importantly, you've also made long-term deals with these AI vendors, some of which have already capitulated on deals, like OpenAI. So you are going to position yourself to neither be unable to meet the demands of the AI vendors, right, and suffer those penalties. Because, again, if you've been involved in contract negotiations, there are typically financial penalties involved with not making delivery on time. But you're also not going to leave yourself adrift should those AI vendors renege on their deal. So this 5-year deal that they made with the vendors, you better believe that if you were Micron, you're going to make a deal that ensures that you don't have that Apple problem of you being 90 days from insolvency. So the rhetoric that went around today that is, you know, it's all evil Micron, that's not the entirety of the tale. And you can come down on that conclusion at the end of the day, but you should come down on that conclusion being aware of all of the information, not being uninformed, not being partially uninformed. Hero says, but Game Logic, I believe we are going to have an oversupply problem within 2 years if the AI bubble pops. That's a possibility. You know, RAM doesn't have an expiration date. It doesn't go bad. Like, I mean, that's I mean, I'm sure at some point it has like a half-life, right, of decay or whatever. But in general, I'm like, If we stockpile RAM, then we stockpile RAM, you know? Then we stay on GDDR7 for longer than people anticipate, you know? Or we farm that stuff down to lower electronic devices and start, 5 years later putting in IoT devices. Hero says the bubble pops and Sony and Apple will be back picking up the capacity at Peanuts. Josh says, correct, we are already in that gaming future. There is far too many games to support current... Right, yeah. There's far too many games to be supported by the number of gamers in the market and how much they can spend. But yeah, I mean, Hero, yes, like, we could have an oversupply problem, but you know what the oversupply problem does? It drives us back to where we were 5 years ago, which is what everybody... Like, which is another point, which is what everyone's complaining today is oriented around. And I've covered this before, too. People look at the prices of SSDs and RAM now, and they say that it's criminal or it's ridiculous that these prices have gone up. And I'm like, again, you guys are lacking context of the entire 20, 30-year history and trend analysis of what has gone on in these industries. And you point to a time where you could buy 32 gigs of RAM for $82. And I'm like, what you need to understand is that was a historic all-time low. That is not the norm. When you go back and you trace back to the history and I said, do trend analysis from the late 90s up until now, that is not the norm. That was the market at the all-time low. And so that's something that needs to be taken into context. And so here we are to talk about games, right, in consoles and affordability. I think a thing that needs to be considered is that there's an effect that happened on the market, and this is part of what I've written about, where prices were constrained and held lower for a long period of time than they otherwise would have been. For instance, had Apple not been strangling Micron, one of two things would have happened. Either Apple's profit margins would have been less because they would have shared the wealth with their other suppliers, right? Which is really what this relationship is talking about. And I go back to Micron, right? And Micron used these terms, right? They had advised Apple the effect that they were going to have, and this is again a thing that we think about in contract, and I've talked about this in the last few months too. Contracts are relationships. You are getting into bed with somebody long term. It's not a transactional relationship. You have a relationship with Whole Foods because you go and you buy from them, but that's transactional. You don't have a contract with Whole Foods unless you subscribe to them for some good that they're going to deliver on a recurring basis. Now you're in a contract. Now it's a relationship. Contracts are relationships, and we talk about this in negotiations. So if you're cutthroat and you squeeze the vendor, you're poisoning the well. And what you are doing is you are creating an environment of toxicity where there is an imperative and a desire for revenge, right? For remediation for all the years. And so again, this is what you're seeing play out. What you're seeing play out is, hey, Apple, when we were down, you guys were cutthroat to us. And so now, don't come in here and tell us you're not going to pay for this amount. The difference now is that Apple and other consumer electronics vendors are absolutely passing that cost on to their consumers. And that's the difference. When it was Apple squeezing Micron, there was no way for Micron to pass those costs on to you. I mean, I guess they could have jacked up the price of their own Crucial RAM at that point. But then if everybody else is selling RAM cheap, then, that doesn't really put them in good position. So I think one of the things that we need to consider is that gaming prices were held at what could be argued as all-time lows. And again, I don't make this personal argument. Brap makes this argument a lot, but this whole notion of like inflation and how we paid less for games. I mean, but what I will say is, we're seeing a rubber band effect now in the same way that Apple's is experiencing a rubber band effect with Micron. I believe that games should have risen in price to $65, or we should have gotten to $70 faster than we did. And we are seeing a rubber band effect from the fact that prices in games were kept static for 15 years, which is not the historical norm. I've done that research and I've written it, and a lot of you guys have heard it from me before. Normally, outside of that period of time in the gaming industry, prices rose every 7 to 10 years. They didn't remain static for 15 years. I'm talking about the core baseline SKU. I'm not talking about the super special SKUs. People always bring up, oh, well, we used to pay like $120. Like, you paid $120 for games because the cartridge had a special ROM chip on it that had expanded storage and was powered by a battery, right? That kept the storage persistent at a time when hard drives didn't exist, right? But I'm talking about the core baseline SKU. Had those prices risen, then there wouldn't be as much of a rubber band effect now. And I go back to why are we seeing some of the things happen? Like, salaries in the gaming industry continue to rise, and they continue to rise. And I know that they continue to rise because they continue to rise in the tech industry. And I go back to the cost of goods sold, right? This is the way it works. Engineers expect to get a price raise, expect to get a raise every year. Sometimes in certain industries, things are depressed. Meaning, like at Ubisoft, they have not received raises for, I think, 3 years was part of their union grievances. And in certain parts of the tech industry, I have also been subject to, right, but like in periods of time where people are not getting raises, those are periods of time when there are mass layoffs. And so you're not complaining about not getting a raise because if you were getting, right, because you're happy that you have a job because lots of people are being laid off. But the normal course is that people are expecting raises. And regardless of whether or not they're getting raises, when you are hiring in new labor, that cost of the new labor you're bringing in is constantly going up. And so therefore, your cost of goods sold is constantly going up. What is happening if your cost of goods sold is constantly going up, but you aren't asking for any more money? You're just continuously eating more and more into your margin. And so this is one of the things, right, to be discussed also with regards to Xbox. Like, it's super scary. To make more expensive goods, right, where the cost of goods sold is going up, that is what your profit feeds, right? Not your revenue. Your revenue pays for the stuff that you've already built. That is your cost of goods sold, essentially. That's your sales. The amount you make above that is your profit. If you therefore want to put more money into the equipment that makes your goods, you need the profit. And so that is what goes into people's raises. And so when the profit is only 3%, when you're only making 3 cents of dollars, those 3 pennies don't go very far to increase the wages of your workforce. So this is the thing that Xbox is going to have to continue with as well, unless you lay a bunch of people off. Then you free up a bunch of additional capital right over your cost of goods sold. So we're paying higher prices, but we're also coming out of a period where prices were capped, prices were constrained, prices didn't go up. And so I think the economic reality is that rubber banding effect that's going to happen. And I've said we're going to get to $80 games faster, and we're seeing that with GTA 6. The big question around GTA 6 being in at $80 is that going to become the new normal? Or are we going to see this continued jousting where people say, well, I'm going to raise my game to $80, right? And then when there's a big outcry, maybe people back off of it like they did when Xbox tried to make Outer Worlds 2 $80. And so here's my additional controversial thing. There are elements of that I am okay with. And what I mean by that is if production costs are rising and those people have to be paid, I am okay. If the cost of goods sold is rising, then it only makes sense for the price of the goods to rise. It does not make sense for the cost of goods sold to continuously go up, but for the price that the goods are sold at to remain static. That makes no sense. Everybody who's walking around with their doomsday flapper panels on, saying that the industry is headed for that is what causes an industry to head for a crash. When the cost of goods sold is going up, but the price that the goods are being sold at remains static, that is what causes you to head towards a crash. But here's the bigger reason why I think those prices should go up, and I'm okay with those prices going up. There needs to be an incentive, and Josh brought it up, I think Hero brought it up too, that we have more games than we have consumers to buy games for. And part of an exacerbating part of the problem is that when there are alternatives, because what people are complaining about is they're complaining about the $70 games. They're complaining about the $80 games. And while they are complaining about them and asserting that budgets need to decrease, game development cycles need to come down, here's my big problem why I point to that as hypocrisy. There are games that have shorter development cycles. There are games that have lower production costs. People don't buy them. And the content creators who are insisting that should happen don't cover them on their podcasts. They are constantly talking about the games that are on the front page of Metacritic. And if a game's not on the front page of Metacritic, it typically doesn't show up in a podcast. It typically doesn't show up in content. It typically doesn't show up in their live streams and their Let's Plays and their content that they post. Because they're constantly talking about the games that are on the front page of Metacritic or that are some, trick arrow in the quiver for a platform. And so how do you get people to buy the lower cost stuff that is available on the market, even though it's already available on the market? The only way that's going to happen is when the upper crust stuff becomes unaffordable for a large swath of your consumer market. And so if $80 games becomes unaffordable to people, that's the market correction that needs to happen. And this is my big thing too. I don't think we're headed for a market crash. I think we're heading for a market correction. And it's a thing that people don't like to hear. There's too many games. And what does that mean? I hate to say it, but I said it last week. There's too many developers. There's too many studios. There's too much content being made that no one wants to buy. And one of the things we need to look at and we need to consider is whether or not the market is saying that it's also not going to support 3 platforms. Because I think what the market has already said is that it's only going to support 2. It's going to do one of 2 things. It's either only going to support 2 at mass scale, or it's going to align to one of the other theories that I've given, which is that it's going to become this niche of niches in these extreme verticals of smaller numbers. But then in order to run those businesses, you're going to have lesser workforce. You cannot run a workforce of 18,500 developers, right? 21,500 developers. If you're in a skinny vertical, and you're talking about trying to make exclusive content, right, to be chained to your platform, and now all of a sudden you're going to be unwilling to send your games anywhere. Maybe you can run a larger operation of that and send your games everywhere if you're making sales, which is also difficult to do when you're running Game Pass. One of the things that we've talked about in these subscription services is, I mentioned before, it's a different leadership talent that needs to run that, that you need to recruit to run that business. And we've seen, and we know for a fact that running a video streaming business is not like running a television network. It's not like running network television. And we've seen the companies that have kind of held on to those models and not get it struggle. Look at Warner Brothers. And so by the same token, the effort Xbox is making to run this hybrid of a traditional gaming service combined with a subscription, it shouldn't be surprising that there are radical inefficiencies and there's problems making that work. And quite frankly, it's quite clear that there's problem recruiting the right talent to actually make that work. And I don't think Matthew Ball is that talent. Matt Booty is definitely not that talent. So, what happens to Xbox? But in these times of rising prices, I think, in my opinion, you have to become okay with higher prices. And one of those reasons is I think that part of the market correction is that the gaming industry needs to become stratified in the console space. And the gaming industry is not very stratified in the console space. I think, in my opinion, not sufficiently enough. And what do I mean by that? There's not a high-end Switch 2 SKU and a low-end Switch 2 SKU. There's definitely not a high-end PlayStation SKU and a low-end PlayStation SKU. And Xbox has tried, a high-end and a low-end SKU, but it's not particularly working well. But in particular, it is not nearly as stratified as it is, say, in the consumer electronics space when you look at an Apple or you look at Samsung, where Samsung provides a lot of different products at a lot of different price points. And when we've asked Samsung why do they do that, they say because we're trying to provide a product that hits at every different, like, stratified demographic for people to be able to afford and on board with our technology. And so the gaming industry for a very, very, very long time has hovered around this $400 or $500 price point for kind of a single line of technical capability. You could look at you could argue there's some stratification between, right, Xbox and PlayStation at the high end and Nintendo at the lower end. That is becoming a little more compressed during this time period. But this is one of the other reasons why I argue that I think this is needed and I think this will be healthy, is because when we talk about software, a big part of the argument is that, again, I go back to games need to take lesser development cycles and games need to take less to produce. But the people making that argument, again, number one, that content already exists, but people don't buy it in sufficient quantities. And so because people don't buy it, the thing people are asking for is they're asking for the high-end stuff to get diluted and for the span between AA and AAA to be compressed. And while that serves the masses, what it does is it disenfranchises the people who are at the high end, who are not being squeezed, who can afford to buy the products, and who want those products at high demand, as evidenced by the way the market has continued to perform. I have a problem, particularly as a PC gamer. I'm sure Innate will agree with me. I have a problem that the continuous effort is to try and get this compression and this dilution when I have an RTX 5080. And so when we argue and we say that we need a bunch of Expedition 33s instead of Spider-Man, Tilu 2, Ghost of Yotei, even though Ghost of Yotei was an incredibly cheap AAA game, GTA 6, right? We say we don't need that, we need more of the lower end stuff. But I'm like, look, the problem I have with that is Expedition 33 is a great game. I promoted it to my favorite game of all time. I don't give Expedition 33 a ration of crap for the platforming. Quite honestly, I never participated in it. I never played it. So I was never exposed to that janky crap. But I also didn't play it because I saw how janky it was. Right? If a GTA 6 or a Spider-Man or a Tilu 2 had anything like that, we would drag them through the mud. But we give Expedition 33 a pass for that because it's okay because it's a small team and it's a lower budget. But my problem is that there's part of the demographic of the industry who does not, I don't want to say does not want that, but they don't want that to become the norm. They don't want the eradication of the high-end stuff. So my feeling is look, if you have to raise the prices on the high-end stuff, then that's fine. And maybe what happens is that stuff becomes less affordable because what we've done is we've taken, like, look at the $70 game. A $70 game covers a ginormous swath of quality. Way more than I should argue. It makes no sense in any other consumer electronic market. Music, when we all paid a flat fee for music, and you could argue that, like, you paid the same money for this music from somebody who was clearly not that good to somebody who was highly talented. Like, there's not necessarily a huge difference in cost of goods sold between how much it took you to make that cassette tape for a low talent musician versus a high talent band, right? Other than like the band itself. But as we know in the record industry, a large amount of the band's earnings, right, and where they charge their big money from is for concerts. So in studio time, I don't think there's much of a difference. There's a huge amount of difference in the cost of goods sold between a lower end game and a higher end game that are both charging $70. And so again, the lower end stuff is already being made. If we want to retain the higher end stuff, then maybe that needs to be, right, charged more for, with the end result that people are more incentivized to buy the lower end stuff. I don't think that the argument should be we need to compress everything and make everything the same so that we can get prices down. Because what that's going to do is that's just going to cause a loss of the high end stuff. That's going to cause a loss of stratification, which is currently what we're suffering under, in my opinion. If the industry were stratified, as it is in the PC space, because I have an RTX 5080, RTX 4080, Innate has a 5090, Resident Evil plays fine on it. And Resident Evil didn't suffer because there are people who don't have the same high-end hardware that we do. And so, in my mind, consoles can also become stratified. Consoles can also have multiple SKUs, and the software can align to that. But in order to get there, what may have to happen is that the high-end stuff may have to become more expensive, which is what we're seeing. And this is a lot of the argument that's being made, is that it's not gaming is becoming unaffordable. It's that high-end gaming is becoming unaffordable for certain parts of the market. For certain other parts of the market, it's still affordable. But I think what should happen, the drift that should occur, is not for us to compress down on the higher end, but is to inform people as consumers that there is still affordable gaming for them. It is not the same thing that they've been eating for the last 21 years. Because in the last 21 years, there have been some aberrant market behaviors and aberrant industry responses that have led us to this space where people don't acknowledge that things should be stratified. We look at the smartphone space. We have high-end smartphones and we have low-end smartphones. And we have the Motorola's in between. And we used to have even greater atomization than that, because before we got to $1,000 iPhones, we had this thing called the $500 hero phone, or the $500 flagship phone. And this was a phone that had all of the compute, sometimes better than flagship phones, but it didn't have, it wasn't unitary body construction, so it still had removable batteries, so some of those phones weren't as small and as pocketable, which was the term we used in the cell phone reviewer space. They sometimes didn't have the lenses that were more expensive that would had to be procured from Sony. And they didn't have the backing of a multi-trillion-dollar company, so they didn't have cloud, so they didn't have some of the image processing, and so the photos didn't look as good. The large Achilles heel was that they still had removable batteries, so they were thicker and heavier, not as pocketable, and they didn't have the imaging, right? But what you had Asus, which still makes like one phone. You had the Xperias, you had the Essential phone, you had the Next Big Robin. You had other phones in this space. This is where OnePlus came from. You had Huawei in the space before the US said that they could make phones over here. But you had players in this space, and what those players in the space did is they kept the Apples and the Googles and the Samsungs from making $1,000 phones, because there were constantly this threat of like the $500 flagship that people said, well, this has the same Snapdragon processor that those other phones do. And part of the problem was, again, and the reason why we lost some of it, was that people weren't informed. They weren't marketed to. They weren't told that these things existed. Also, part of the problem was part of the consumer behavior. People didn't go buy them, because typically you just had to go buy these phones. But so because the carriers wouldn't carry them. Why would the carriers not carry them? Because they wanted to get you wrapped into a long-term deal. They didn't want you coming in with a BYOD, and they didn't want you coming in and just paying a flat price for the phone. They always wanted to get you wrapped into like long-term subsidizing or long-term financing. But while those phones were there, the market was stratified, much greater than it is now. It's still a little more stratified, I think, than the console gaming space. But there was goodness out of that, and there was goodness for consumers out of that. There was greater competition, and consumers benefited from it. But in the meantime, like, Apple still made innovative and high-tech phones. Samsung did, and Google did. Google graduated. It was making the Nexus program phone, which was like a $500 flagship hero phone without all the bells and whistles. But when the $500 flagship Hero phone space shriveled up, what did Google do? It promoted itself to the $1,000 phone space, and it started making the Google Pixel. So again, we as consumers lost out, and a lot of that is happening, in my mind, in the console space. But the console space has the additional Achilles heel of like having very, very expensive software, which costs way more money to make than apps. So in my mind, console stratification would not be a bad thing. And I think we're seeing elements of that. PlayStation has talked about, its handheld strategy. And of course we have the problem of this notion of, the Series S being a problem. And I'm like, yeah, that's a problem. Like it needs to be done smartly. And again, you look at Apple, they do things smartly. You can make an app and you just make one app, and the operating system is context aware of what hardware you're deploying the app on, and it behaves like a tablet app or a phone app. Quite frankly, it behaves like a desktop app if it's in the Mac store and you pull it up, right? And you pull it up to the desktop. And then it scales in performance and in what it can pull off. So a lot of those things are development methodologies and supplier side things that would have to happen as well. The problem with the Series S, I think, is that the development kits, right, weren't really engineered and architected for a way that accommodated lower end hardware. We see a lot of an effort to be smarter about that with PlayStation, where I think the PlayStation plan is just going to be, if you deploy that game to the lower end SKU, it's just gonna see the the bit, right, and it's just gonna raise the flag and run in low power mode. And that's going to be their way to not diversify their own workforce, right? In terms of like having to have, PlayStation portable teams, right? Making PlayStation portable content versus, set top console box teams. That was obviously a huge drag on them, and I think they learned from that, and so I think they're trying to approach that a little differently. Real Nate says, yeah, I think PlayStation plan sounds smart. Real Nate's 1440p B sounded really that marketing term. For the Series S. Real Nate says, yeah, exactly. There would be huge problems if we got Oppo or Xiaomi or something like that in the U.S. market. And those phones are available in the European market, and I think the European market fares better as consumers than we do in the U.S., right, where we've lost a lot of that middle ground space and the lack of stratification. Josh Ayers says we need to abandon the lowest end and move forward. I don't disagree, Josh, right, in one vector in terms of, like, I don't agree with this notion that this whole thing, that a content creator has said about delaying the next generation. I think there's lots of problems with that. We're not running out of runway, right, in terms of what we can develop for these consoles. But I'm like, but again, GPUs are going to move on, right? They're not going to hold position and drag their feet and wait for consoles. Consoles right now enjoy a great positioning in the tech stack because they are the center line. They are the main line. When you hear developers, right, the centric target is the 16 gigabyte GPU, and that's because that's what the consoles have. And quite frankly, PC gamers actually on 8 gigabyte GPUs suffer more, I think, than even the Series S does, right, in terms of games that they get that they would want to play that don't perform well because they run out of VRAM even sooner than the Series S does. So yeah, I mean, we need to abandon the low end in terms of, right, things that make things hard. But if you're talking about software, again, I think lower end, cheaper hardware like we already have, right, in terms of indies, right, it's fine. We just need to have a demographic that consumes them, I think. Device says, I have a Series S. I couldn't use it because every time I play a game on it, I say, will this game is very good and I want to play it on better consoles, which is PS5. Yeah. I often have that problem because I employ hardware that runs the stack right from low to high, and a lot of times I'm playing. Well, again, I mean, this is my Forza Horizon 6, not problem, but I'm playing Forza Horizon 6 on Xbox, and I'm not happy. I'm surly and salty about the fact that this thing is still 4K 30 on the console. And now I've spoiled myself because now I've gone to play it on PC on an RTX 4070 Super, and I'm like the span between quality mode of Forza Horizon 6 on Xbox versus how it plays on PC, where it's the same developer, right? It's crazy. So the last thing that I want to talk about is like what should people be doing, and this is a little bit of my pushback against this woe is me, there's nothing we can do, evil corporations, blah, 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 blah. That's great. But here's my, these things are happening. And so you can put your quarter down on one of two things. You can put your quarter down on hope that, more RAM capacity is going to come online and we're going to change RAM technologies and, GDDR, whatever is going to be okay while prices go up on GDDR6 and GDDR7, whatever. You can put your hope on the roulette wheel that things are going to be okay and things will just work themselves out. To be quite honest, that's kind of where I am to a certain extent. I'm not full of doom and gloom. I think some of this will work itself out. And I think some of it will work itself out because as we see from the deal that the consumer electronics guys made with Micron today, Apple doesn't not want to sell you a smartphone because RAM prices are going up, right? PlayStation does not want to sell PlayStations because RAM prices are going up. And so if they want to continue to sell people PlayStations when people can't afford PlayStations at higher prices, then Sony will figure that out. Microsoft will figure it out. Apple will figure it out. Dell will figure it out. As I talked about when this whole RAM thing started, it's not like people don't want to sell you RAM. Yes, money can be made by selling that RAM to enterprises and people building out AI data centers. But it's not like people want to not make money in markets that are available, that have people with an addressable demand. So in my mind, a lot of this is going to work itself out and people are going to figure it out. I don't know that that's where I leave myself and putting my poker chip down. I think you have to make decisions and you have to actually go through the thought exercise of what is the paradigm change. If this thing goes pear-shaped and I really can't afford high-end console gaming, and if the gaming industry doesn't listen to game logic, it doesn't provide me stratified choices, it doesn't provide me options at lower price points, right, and stays where everything's on the high end and therefore things are very super expensive, because to a certain extent the gaming companies think that that's okay because the upper income, right, census band is actually increasing and the middle class is actually getting smaller, which is the thing I've tried to inform people of, but people choose to not believe me. They want to insist that everything needs to be will be kept affordable for the middle class, and I'm like, we've already broken that rule. If you want to believe that that's going to be the case, you need to acknowledge that they've already shown hands that show that they don't care about that. So the paradigm of what you're going to do, I don't know what everybody else is going to do, but I do want to talk through what I'm going to do, because again, I think maybe people need some help in coming to decisions or figuring stuff out and in some other way than just to say this is bullshit, they shouldn't be doing this. I don't know how you think that's going to change their behavior. So three things that I've personally thought of that I'm looking at is the way I purchase electronics, gaming tech, is I have an electronics kitty fund, right? And I have an account where I stuff money. And sometimes I put a lot of money there, sometimes I put a little money there. All depends on what's going on, right? Maybe I have to take the car into the shop, and so I don't put as much money in there. But I always try and find $10 or something to put in that account recurringly. And then when I want to buy something, a gadget or whatever, that's what I pull from. Not software, but hardware. Software to me is a commodity, so I just buy it whenever. But hardware-wise, I have a kitty. And so yes, you're probably headed towards a point where gaming hardware is probably no longer an impulse buy. Meaning gaming hardware is no longer something that, oh, this thing just came out and I just got paid, so I'm just going to go buy it. yeah, you're probably not going to be there. I would argue you shouldn't have been there in the first place, but like you're probably moving out of that zone. So one thing you can do, and I'm saying this because it sounds like a lot of people don't do it. Like I'm saying, maybe you need to have an account. And there's a term that's used. I can't remember what the term is, but like there's a tactic that you use, if you wanted to, where like, if you're going to buy a $200 thing, then you save $400. And then when that account goes down to 200, then if the next thing you want to buy is a $500 thing, then you save $1,200, and then you pull the 500 out. So now you're at $700, right? So the thing is constantly increasing. You can go do that research. I'm not a financial advisor. I'm just telling you, I have an electronic slush fund where I put money so that when I want to go buy a thing, I'm buying a thing. And here's the other thing that I'll put on top of that. I would advise you, this is my own personal, I pay cash for everything, right? When it comes to technology. I don't buy anything on credit. So like this argument that I saw between the two content creators where one guy was saying, go get on a payment plan. That's not something I personally do. We're going to cover one exception to that, but I pay cash for everything. If I'm not on the request list, I'm on the wait list, I think, for the Steam machine. I'm not planning on buying a Steam machine, but if I were going to buy a Steam machine, I would pay cash for the Steam machine. I wouldn't put it on credit. So my point of this is that if things are coming more expensive and they're exiting the zone where they are an impulse buyer, they're exiting the zone where you could afford to just take money from payday and pay for it. We also call that living payday to payday, but I don't want to get into that because I don't want to sound accusatory. But look, if a console is going to be $1,000, if you realistically think a console is going to be $1,000 and you want to continue gaming, then maybe what you ought to do is take $10, $20, whatever, and put it in an electronic slush fund so that when the console comes out, that's $1,000, you have the money in the savings account, right? Or whatever account you're going to put it in. That's one way of that I deal with it. The one exception I will say to that is when it comes to Apple, and I will admit to being that type of consumer. Where it comes to Apple, again, I'm in the Apple ecosystem, and so I decided after I had been in the Apple ecosystem and I bought into it a little bit, and the Apple ecosystem is a little like we talk about the BMW or Mercedes system, if you're not familiar with that. A lot of the way you get into those higher end kind of luxury cars and become a long-term consumer of those brands, when you like talk to like the people who are like in that space, their general recommendation is you buy an inexpensive entry-level used Beamer, right? And you get into the market, buy something you can afford, because those things retain their trade-in value for much longer. But more importantly, you will get cut a better deal with the dealer when you go to buy what you really want to buy. So you buy the lower end Beamer, you buy the lower end Mercedes, you drive it for a couple of years. Then you take it in when you see the thing that you want, right? And now you're coming onto the lot as a BMW owner or a Mercedes owner. And so your negotiating position is a little different. But more importantly, also, you get trade-in values, right? So, and this is what I've done with Apple. Like, I got into the Apple ecosystem, and by the time I was kind of making my second round of purchases, and I've talked a little bit about this, like some people don't know, but like the Apple trade-in ecosystem is manga. Like the way it works is incredibly in my opinion, it's consumer friendly and efficient in a way like nothing else. But like I order a new MacBook Pro, they send me a box. The box literally doesn't take any like scissors or getting out a penknife or any of that, right? I take my old MacBook Pro. We won't talk about all the technology stuff of like how to transfer rate or whatever, but I take my old MacBook Pro, I put it in this thing, I tape it shut, I send it off, I get a return credit, right? And the return credit's like huge. Like I don't pay full price for any new Apple device. When it comes to phones, like these people who like get the next iPhone every year, when I do that with my phone, I'm typically only paying like maybe $200, $300 for a new phone. Like if I were to do year to year, I'm typically only paying like $200 or $300. So at any rate, so my point is the Apple stuff is the one exception. I do have an Apple Card, and what I do is when I want to buy a expensive Apple device, like not when I buy an Apple TV or my HomePod or something like that, but like if I'm buying a MacBook Pro, I will put it on my Apple Card, send my trade-in in, get my credit back for my trade-in, right, knocking $500 to $800 off the price of my MacBook, and then I will immediately pay for my MacBook Pro at the reduced rate that's already come off my card because of the trade-in. So, that's a tactic. And then the last thing I will say is, then the third tactic that I've, again, this is a mental exercise that I put myself through, is I've said, what if the world becomes one where I either can't afford a console or a console is just more than I'm willing to pay? Like, I'm not willing to save money in my electronic slush fund for it. I'm not willing to put it on my Apple Card and then turn around and pay it off, right? Like, it's literally become too much. Again, I go back to, and I talked to somebody, I can't remember her name, on Blue Sky, but, we went back and forth on this on an article she had written and comparing it to the article I had written. The time may come to find gaming alternatives. Unfortunately, for me, despite a lot of other content creators talking about a lot of these things, I've actually done it and spent years doing it, so I'm actually familiar and I know how the space works. Because a lot of people talk about, well, people can just play mobile games. I'm like, have you played a mobile game? Like, have you spent time? Like, have you actually surveyed? Like, are you familiar with the market and the developers? Right, and know how this stuff performs, and know what different devices you could play it in, and know all no, they haven't. Like, they're just constantly talking. But at any rate, I mean, that's what I've said. I mean, I've said, one of the first things I would do is I would go back to mobile gaming. I was a heavy mobile gamer when I was in grad school for the second time, because even though I had a PlayStation 3 and I had an Xbox 360 and I had gaming PCs, I couldn't afford in the middle of study hour. If I quartered off 3 or 4 hours for study time, I didn't have the time to go down and turn on the PlayStation 3 and get heavily engaged in a game for an hour, because it would just blow up my schoolwork. So what I did was I played on my tablet a lot. I played on my phones. And, I'd be studying, and then I'd have my iPad next to me, right, or my Android tablet, and I'd play something for 30 minutes. And I became, I became familiar with the genres that I liked and all that kind of stuff. So my first thing would be, I spent time connecting controllers and all that kind of stuff. And I have a mobile gaming kit that I take when I go on travel and blah, 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 blah. So that would be my first recourse. If I can't in certain genres, play great on mobile. There are driving games that play great on mobile. When you talk about the Asphalt series, and work great with a controller. There are strategy games, right, that work great on mobile. So that would be one of the things that I would immediately go to, right, if the world just became a place where I couldn't afford a console game. And then the other thing I would look at is retro gaming. There are people, I haven't spent time in this, so I would have to become educated, but there are people who are in this retro gaming scene who are familiar with these pop-up flea markets and stuff where they go and trade and shop for older games and older cartridges. There's probably some things that, I wouldn't do because some of those things are super expensive. There are the portable consoles that came out a while ago that you can try and find used. But that would be I don't know where they are now. I'm sure they're more expensive than they used to be, but there were all these mini consoles that would come with 100 Taito games on them or something like that for a very low price. And so my point is that your gaming habits might have to change. I'm in the Apple ecosystem, and I'm subscribed to Apple Arcade, and I just stopped consuming from it because I'm more interested in kind of the core gaming stuff that I get into. But my point was I've engaged, I've gone through the thought exercise of figuring out alternative gaming modalities and spent time curating and cultivating myself in those spaces. That is a more productive thing to do, I think, than just complaining that gaming is becoming unaffordable. And in particular, when it comes to content creators, again, a big problem I have is we have content creators who are running around saying the sky is falling, the volcano's erupting, gaming's becoming unaffordable, but they're doing nothing to educate the consumers that they supposedly care so much for about these alternative paths to affordable gaming. And so these are the types of things that I think that have to happen. You have to change. You're going to have to change your consumer habits. You're going to have to change your purchasing habits. You're going to have to change the way you go about, planning for these consumer purchases. Or you may just have to find alternative lifestyle approaches. And I don't think that those are things that we're not equipped to do or that we can't do. There was a time in my life where I would only buy a brand new car. because I bought high-end performance vehicles. I was very concerned about the break-in. I forget what the thumb rules are now, like the first 10,000 or 15,000 miles or whatever that you drive a high-performance car, and how many RPMs you're supposed to rev it to, and keep it below. And this was the time that I also rode motorcycles as my alternate. Like, so my point is, there was a time in my life I would only buy a new car, would not touch a used car because of that hyper concern. Then I hit a point in my life where now I will never buy a new car. I will only buy a used car. I have cars that I've just paid cash for. But my point is that as your lifestyles change and the market changes, and your priorities change and your requirements change, like, these are other things that you have to do. But we're spending a lot of time yelling and screaming and arguing, like, content creators and gamers who are supposed to be aligned to the same platform, fighting with each other, partially because you guys were disingenuous and hypocritical in the first place, and that's why you're fighting now. Because some of you are breaking bread with the voice track, right, of the platform owner. But I'm like, we're spending a lot of angst about things that, like, that's not making RAM prices go down. It's not making games cheaper, right? It didn't stop GTA6 from being $80, right? Be prepared. We don't know right now. Like, GTA6 on their website calls it a single player experience. So, like, there's no guarantee that GTA Online is not going to have paid access. It's not going to be a separate $30 or $40 SKU. So these things happen. These things happen throughout the course of history. We all figure out ways to contend with them. Maybe it just makes you happy to shake your fists at the tree, as the ship is going down. I don't know, but there's more exploratory conversations that need to be had, and more examples that need to be shown, and more experimentation that needs to be done. In some of these alternative modes of gaming for content creators, so that you can better inform people who are consumers who may be impacted by this. And if you're not impacted by this, like I say, for a lot of these content creators who own all 3 or 4 platforms, then, I also don't know that all the whinging, makes any sense. Real Nate says, I'll be playing old Fire Emblem games on my old hardware till I die if I have to. Yeah. No mention of GTA Online. I think it's next year and it's $30. Yeah, it doesn't necessarily surprise me. Wouldn't surprise me, Josh. Happy I'm not the only one who's conservative with phones, and like Logic, I'm only into used cars. Yeah. But my wife has to have a new car. Yeah, there are those things. Josh Ayers says he would get into anime, manga, and guitar. I'm set. Real I agreed, Logic, because the reality is the affordability isn't a problem for them. Right, and this is the thing that I wrote, in my article, at the end, and I'm sorry for you guys who have read it or have heard it before, but I guess it's pertinent to tonight. See if I can find it. Yeah, that is what is going on now in terms of the responses that pepper the landscape of social media with regards to the rising prices of video gaming. It is mainly about how people feel, and in that, what needs to be acknowledged and recognized is that the reactions are not everyone's, because people in the upper income band are not being priced out. And not just social media, but in real-world terms of how the market is, and will act. For the middle classes, they are experiencing a thing called the squeeze. They are experiencing an acute contraction in their earnings, largely due to the rising costs for housing, healthcare, and education exceeding wage growth. While six-figure incomes were once firmly upper middle class, they are increasingly becoming the standard for middle class status in many U.S. states. And the buying power in that band is under siege. Meanwhile, as I've been saying for 4 years, and as corroborated by Circana data months ago, the upper income households continue to spend. Here's my great bumper sticker. The great age of affordable gaming, first letter of all those words is capitalized. The great age of affordable gaming is over. Since 2020, we have entered the long-term quasi-perpetual bubble, a fifth age in the economy of the gaming market and industry. A period of time when the industry is mostly moving forward on the support of the upper income bands, with less support from the middle class. So people need to come up with decisions and contingencies and start rethinking what their approach to gaming is. Yelling that games should be $50, $60. We've been doing that for years and it has not changed. It has not budged and it's getting worse. Yelling that games shouldn't be exclusive didn't change the industry. Quite frankly, PlayStation looked at all you guys saying games shouldn't be exclusive and they said, F you. Not only are we going to make them exclusive, we're going to take them off of PC, and now they're just console exclusive. And even Xbox is admitting that they need they're saying they need exclusivity, although their approach to it doesn't make any sense. But continuous ratings, yelling and screaming about the way things should be, and not only does the industry not hold back, they more aggressively move in the direction that people are insisting that they shouldn't go in or won't go in. So these are things to consider. Again, when I covered the VentureBeat Summer Games thing a few years ago as a freelancer for GamesBeat, the thing that I heard from industry people on the finance side were, when we present something bad from the gaming industry, gamers will complain about it in an uninformed manner, which just tells us that they're going to complain all the time anyway, so we get desensitized and we don't care. The other option is that gamers will initially complain and will go quiet, and then we will repackage it and relabel it and present it later as something different, but it's really the same thing, and they'll buy it. Gamers complained about free-to-play. We were vitriolic about free-to-play. And free-to-play is not only here to stay, but it is in large ways taken over, becoming the largest revenue earning factor, right, in the industry. We complained about NFTs. Epic is bringing back a thing that looks remarkably NFT-like, but they're not calling it NFTs. And people aren't pushing back against it. DLSS5 and the yassification of faces, I guarantee you that NVIDIA technology will go into place and it will go into GPUs, and it may be called something else and it may look like something different, but it'll be the exact purpose and point of the thing that they put out on Front Street the first time around, and they'll call it something different and people will still buy NVIDIA GPUs in droves. This whole notion that the gamers are going to rise up against DLSS5, not going to happen. Do you think DLSS5 isn't coming out on the next NVIDIA GPU? And you think NVIDIA is going to spend millions of dollars walking back something in do you think they're going to take that technology and completely say, oh, that's a sunk cost, all the engineering labor hours that went into that, we're not going to deploy it. We'll just take that down as a tax write-off. Like when we complain about stuff in the gaming community in a partially informed or worse, uninformed manner, it earns us the lack of respect of the gaming industry and further convinces them that they can do things to pull wool over our eyes. I constantly talk about Xbox, and you guys have mentioned it too, Xbox talking to people like they're stupid. And if you buy into being talked to like you're stupid, then they are just going to become convinced that you are stupid, and they are going to keep coming back and doing the same things over and over and over again because you're not giving them an incentive to have to communicate with you any different way. Dry Chisel says, do you think next gen is on schedule to release next year? I hope so. I'm ready for better console hardware. Yeah, I would agree. And this is my pushback on the whole delay these consoles. I mean, there are technological reasons why I don't agree with that, but here's my big thing is so we saw the numbers tonight, right? PlayStation hardware down the most of May. Or whatever. Yeah, it's the lowest May that it's ever been, or whatever, for a while, or whatever. Xbox is the lowest it's ever been. Do we think that PlayStation just wants to not sell you PlayStation hardware? Do we think that the current state of being is acceptable? What does Microsoft have to do to bump hardware sales when hardware sales tank? They have to roll out a new version of the operating system. That's a whole part of the shtick. The whole reason for them updating Windows is to kick off a new round of PC procurement, laptop procurement. That's the primary reason they do it. They have to give people a reason to go buy a new thing. How do we do that with consoles? We make a new console. We don't kick off a new round. Fortunately, GTA6 is kind of coming to pull people's, fat out of the fryer. But GTA6 is forever. That's not going to power the industry for, hardware sales for 3 years. So what are they going to have to do? They're going to have to introduce new hardware. Oh, but the hardware's going to be too expensive. Nobody's going to buy it. Well, we should, number one, talk in absolutes, because somebody will buy it. What happens if they don't buy it in numbers? Then we have to keep building the PlayStation 5, which is what I think they're going to do. Just like Nintendo is continuing to build the Nintendo Switch. Now where are you 2 years from now? You're at a point where a third of your MAU is on PlayStation 6, right? And 2/3 of your MAU is on PlayStation 5, maybe. So what does that mean to you from a software perspective? I'm sorry, and some of your MAU is on the PlayStation 6 handheld or whatever. My prediction is we call the iPhone Air the iPhone 17 Air. It's not the iPhone 17 Air. It's just the iPhone Air. And I think the PlayStation handheld is going to be that same. I don't think it's going to be the PlayStation 5 or the PlayStation 6 handheld. I don't think it's going to have a number. I think it's just going to be called the PlayStation handheld. So some of your MAU will be on that. But what does that mean to you from a software perspective? That means you need to smartly create software that runs on all three of those pieces of hardware. How do you do that? You push the low power button, right? Or whatever the case is. What you don't do is you don't trifurcate your development teams across 3 different platforms and say you have to make a PlayStation 6 version, a PlayStation 5 version, and a PlayStation handheld version. That's the point I think of the architecture, right? That they're moving towards. Which is the exact same way it is in the PC space. We don't make a separate version for the RTX 5080 and the RTX 2080. We make the same version, right? And then when the code is deployed, right, the executable deploys in a way that's applicable to the hardware, right, or the code is traversed that is applicable to the hardware platform. And I think console space is going to become the same way from a software perspective, because I think it's going to have to, because I think some of the more expensive hardware is going to become out of the reach of affordability, right, of the mass market scale. So there's the whole theory, right, junked altogether. PSP 2. Yeah, that would be interesting. I think that would be a great marketing device for, again, as somebody said, the old heads, right? Because we were on the PlayStation Portable and have fond memories of the Portable. Here I'm going to keep saving my money for wherever the PS6 is coming. Yeah, people bought the Steam machines. Yeah, I don't think they'll buy them in huge numbers. I think the Steam machine impact is, I was predicting that they would sell between 9 million and 15 million. I think the high prices mean that they're going to sell closer to 5 million, 3 to 5. I think I've said 3 to 7 million. 7 million is probably too high. I'd probably say maybe 3 to 6. But I think, again, my big theory is they don't need to convince consumers to buy them. They need to convince OEMs to build them, I think is what the point is. Joshua says 5 to 7 is where I sit. Yeah, that would be, quite honestly, at those prices, if they sell 5 to 7 million, I think that's a win for Valve. Because I don't think Valve wants to become a hardware company. I think they want to promote and show proof of concept that SteamOS is a viable thing, so that OEMs will build them instead of building Windows machines. Because I think that is a much more attractive product than Windows 11 is right now. I think Windows 11 is horrible. I think Windows 11 is horrible, and particularly in terms of problems it hasn't fixed and hasn't addressed, and that they refuse to. Makes absolutely no sense. Quite honestly, only makes sense for a gamer today just because of the state of legacy. Not because it's the best thing. Let's see a few more comments. I don't know if PS6 is next year. I think the handheld is next year. Yeah, I'm not sure. I just right now where I land is I'm not of the mindset that it's 2030, which I've heard some content creators say 2028 at an outside pitch. I mean, and I would pitch early 2028 at that. Like at the end of the day, I don't even really care what year it is. What I'm saying is that you may not need the PlayStation 6, but I think PlayStation needs the PlayStation 6. You may not need Project Helix, and may be fine with your Xbox Series X, but I absolutely assure you Xbox needs Project Helix, right? They need new hardware. Like the notion that you're going to get better, that you're going to the Asha Sharma, there's a turnaround. This is why I say I don't think there's a turnaround. Like how in the world are you going to turn the business around continuing to sell the same hardware that's already failed? That makes absolutely no sense. To be talking about a comeback. You got a 42-year-old quarterback saying, "Oh, this is our year." I'm like, what are you doing? Real Nate says, I think 2028 is perfect, right? Sometimes I feel like I'm taking crazy pills when I see people suggesting delay next gen to the 2030s. Real Nate says, let me get my intergalactic and enjoy GTA. Hero Down Under says exactly what I said. If it's 2028, it has to be Q1. Yeah, I mean, I'm as bullish as H1, as first half of 2028. But, I don't know where that ends up. Josh says, April was a great time for Switch. Take April or May. 2028 is PS6. Okay. Well, thanks a lot, everybody, for joining in tonight. Like I said, I did not know exactly where that was going to go because, like I said, there's so much stuff. I definitely did not plan for that being 2 hours. I haven't been watching the clock at all. So thanks a lot, everybody, for joining in tonight. I can't say thank you enough. I had no idea, no intention that it was going to go this long, which means it was a really good conversation, really great participation in the chat, really great opportunity to roll a lot of these things up. It was kind of a perfect storm this week because so many different elements that I think point to three big spiky topics, which I think I tried to get down tonight. I maybe didn't do a great job of that. The complexity of the industry that we're talking about. I always say that the landscape of the industry is incredibly complex. I think when you boil that ocean and you get it down to brass tacks, I think that there are a smaller number of acute issues, and in particular, if you're on the consumer side, like I said, to me, it boils down to those three. You either got to learn how to save your money, you either got to learn to financially position yourself to be able to react, right, to changing, market positioning, or when devices go on sale or how they go on sale. Or you need to consider alternatives to how you approach gaming. I really insist I got to go. We'll find the topics for the Otter podcast. Yeah, Nate. I look forward to joining you guys tomorrow night. So thanks so much, everybody. I really appreciate it. Until next time, take care of yourselves. Stay safe out there. Play the games that you like. Come here to talk to me about the games that you love. Once again, my name has been Game Logic for the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel on YouTube. One of the co-hosts of the Enough to Keep Going weekly video games podcast on the E2KG Network podcasting channel on YouTube. That show will be live on Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So please feel free to come by and talk to us then. We'll be handling different topics, probably wildly different from the stuff I covered tonight. But if anybody happens to wander through and watch this video on demand on the Rounding Off Infinity Gaming channel, please feel free to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you can just receive a notification whenever I post new content. I will be live sometime next week. My objective is I'm doing one of these solo podcasts a week. Keep your eyes on the front page of the YouTube channel and on my Blue Sky account to see when the plan is for that. Thanks so much again for joining in for tonight. That's going to do it for me. Good night, good luck, and good gaming. I will talk to you guys next week. Until then, I'm out of here.